On the first rain of spring, a frightened boy meets a mysterious stranger, beginning a friendship that quietly changes both their lives forever. The umbrella slipped from Jimin's trembling hand just as the first crack of thunder split the grey afternoon, and before he could chase it across the flooded street, a pair of unfamiliar hands caught it inches away from a speeding bicycle. Rain crashed against the pavement with a relentless rhythm, turning every rooftop into a silver drum. The wind carried the scent of soaked pine trees from the hills surrounding the small town, mixing with the earthy fragrance rising from the wet ground. Everything seemed blurred behind curtains of rain, except the silhouette standing in front of Jimin. The boy was about the same age. His black hair clung to his forehead, tiny droplets sliding down his cheeks without bothering him. Oversized hoodie looked several sizes too big, and despite being completely drenched, he smiled as if storms had never frightened him. "You dropped this," he said softly, extending the umbrella. Jimin hesitated before taking it. His fingers were cold, almost numb, but the stranger's hands were surprisingly warm. "Thank you," stranger shrugged. "It would have flown all the way to the river." Jimin forced a small smile. "I probably would have chased it." "I know," those two words felt strangely certain. Jimin frowned. You look like someone who always runs after things." For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The rain became louder. Cars disappeared behind walls of water while distant thunder rolled across the mountains. "I'm Jungkook," the boy finally said. "Jimin." Names lingered in the cold air between them. Jimin had moved to the town only 3 weeks earlier. Everything still felt unfamiliar, the streets, the school, even the silence that settled over the neighborhood every evening. His mother worked late at the local library, leaving him alone most afternoons in a small rented house, surrounded by old maple trees whose branches scratched against his bedroom window whenever the wind grew strong. He had not made a single friend, not because he disliked people, because he no longer believed friendships lasted. 3 years earlier, his father had disappeared during a rescue mission as a firefighter. No goodbye, no body, only silence and unanswered questions. Since then, every farewell felt permanent, every smile seemed temporary. He had quietly convinced himself that keeping people at a distance hurt less. Jungkook, however, acted as though those invisible walls did not exist. Without asking permission, he opened the umbrella wider and stood beside Jimin. "Come on." "Where?" "I know somewhere the rain sounds prettier." Jimin should have refused. Instead, curiosity followed him. They walked through narrow streets lined with old stone walls covered in emerald moss. Rainwater streamed through tiny canals beside the sidewalks while sparrows hid beneath wooden rooftops. Jungkook never seemed uncomfortable with silence. He simply walked, occasionally glancing upward as raindrops landed on the leaves overhead. After several minutes, they reached an abandoned train station. The tracks had long been swallowed by wild grass. Broken windows reflected the storm like shattered mirrors. Inside the station stood dozens of forgotten wooden benches. Rain leaked through cracks in the ceiling, creating countless tiny ripples across puddles scattered on the floor. "Used to be busy," Jungkook said. "My grandfather told me trains came here every morning." "What happened?" "They built a new station farther away, so everyone forgot this place." Jungkook nodded. "People forget places faster than memories." Jimin quietly repeated those words in his mind. "People forget places faster than memories." The sentence sounded too thoughtful for someone their age. They sat together watching the rain, no phones, no conversations forced to fill silence, only the endless music of falling water. After several minutes, Jungkook suddenly laughed. "What? You've smiled 3 times. "I did not." "You did." "I wasn't smiling." "You smile with your eyes." Jimin instinctively looked away. Nobody had noticed that before, not even his mother. Perhaps especially not his mother, who had spent the last few years hiding her own sadness behind exhausted smiles. The rain softened into a gentle drizzle. Outside, mist floated above the abandoned tracks like wandering ghosts. Jungkook stood. "Come." Again, no explanation, only confidence. This time Jimin followed without hesitation. They crossed a narrow wooden bridge over a shallow stream where paper boats drifted lazily beneath tangled branches. Children from nearby neighborhoods often floated handmade boats there after school. Most quickly sank. One continued drifting farther than the others. Jungkook watched it disappear. "I always wonder who made the boats that survive." Jimin looked at him. "You think about strange things." "Don't." "I try not to." "Why?" "Because thinking too much usually hurts." Jungkook remained quiet. For the first time, the cheerful expression faded from his face. "My father says people become lonely long before they realize it." Jimin felt something tighten inside his chest. He wanted to ask more. Instead, he remained silent. The afternoon slowly turned into evening. Streetlights reflected on rain-soaked roads like scattered stars. As they returned toward town, they passed an elderly woman struggling to carry grocery bags through puddles. Before Jimin could react, Jungkook hurried forward and carried everything to her house. He accepted nothing in return, not money, not snacks, only a grateful smile. When they resumed walking, Jimin asked quietly, "Why do you always help strangers?" Jungkook shrugged. "Maybe someone once helped me." "You don't remember?" "I remember the feeling." Those words stayed with Jimin long after they reached the crossroads separating their neighborhoods. "So," Jimin awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck. "I guess." Jungkook waited patiently. "I'll see you tomorrow." His smile returned immediately. I was hoping you'd say that. For reasons Jimin could not explain, those simple words warmed him more than the umbrella ever had. That evening, the rain finally stopped. Moonlight emerged between drifting clouds, illuminating rooftops still sparkling with leftover droplets. At home, Jimin quietly dried his shoes by the doorway while his mother prepared dinner in the kitchen. "You seem happier today," she observed. "Do I? You've been humming." He paused. He had not even noticed. "I met someone. Classmate. A friend." The word surprised him. Friend. It felt unfamiliar, fragile, yet somehow right. His mother smiled with genuine relief, the kind that reached tired eyes carrying years of quiet grief. "Glad." Later that night, Jimin stood beside his bedroom window. The maple leaves shimmered beneath the moon. Tiny droplets still fell from the branches, sounding almost like soft applause. He thought about Jungkook, about abandoned train stations, paper boats. Warm hands catching an umbrella, people forgetting places faster than memories. For the first time since moving into the town, the silence outside no longer felt empty. It sounded like the beginning of something gentle. The first rain had arrived unexpectedly, so had friendship. Neither of them knew that years later, whenever storms returned and raindrops touched the earth with that same quiet rhythm, they would remember this afternoon, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was the moment two lonely hearts unknowingly began healing each other. Morning arrived beneath a sky still wrapped in pale clouds, as though the storm had merely fallen asleep instead of leaving. Moist air drifted through Jimin's open bedroom window, carrying the fresh scent of wet grass and blooming wildflowers from the hills beyond the neighborhood. For the first time since moving to the quiet town, he woke before his alarm. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The memory of yesterday returned with surprising clarity: the abandoned train station, the paper boats floating beneath the bridge, the strange boy who smiled at storms, Jungkook. A small smile appeared before Jimin even realized it. He quickly hid it from himself, sitting upright and rubbing his eyes as though emotions could simply be brushed away. His mother noticed the difference almost immediately during breakfast. "You seem excited." "I'm just not late today," she chuckled quietly, pouring warm tea into his cup. "I haven't seen you leave for school this early before." Jimin simply shrugged. The truth was embarrassingly simple. He hoped to see Jungkook again. Outside, puddles still reflected pieces of the silver morning sky. Tiny birds hopped across the sidewalk searching for worms brought to the surface by the rain. Every leaf seemed brighter after yesterday's storm, washed clean by the endless water. The walk to school somehow felt shorter than usual. Students gathered in noisy groups near the entrance, laughing and exchanging stories from the previous afternoon. Jimin recognized only a few faces. He still felt like an outsider observing a world that had already learned how to move together without him. His eyes searched instinctively, then he found him. Jungkook stood beneath an old cherry tree near the front gate, feeding crumbs of bread to a pair of sparrows. Instead of throwing the pieces carelessly, he crouched low so the birds would not feel frightened. One sparrow landed close enough to peck gently from his hand. "You actually came early." Jimin blinked. "You were waiting." Jungkook stood, brushing tiny crumbs from his sleeve. "I thought you might." Answer was so casual that it almost sounded obvious. For reasons Jimin couldn't explain, his heartbeat became strangely uneven. They entered the school together. Whispers followed them through the hallway. Some students seemed surprised that the quiet transfer student was walking beside one of the friendliest boys in school. Neither of them paid much attention. During literature class, rain began tapping softly against the classroom windows once again. Their teacher spoke about stories and how every person carried invisible chapters inside themselves. "People rarely become who they are overnight," she explained. "Every smile, every fear, every decision comes from pages others cannot see." Jimin glanced sideways. Jungkook was staring out the window. His notebook remained open. Instead of taking notes, he had filled an entire page with tiny sketches of clouds. Each cloud looked different, some bright, some dark, some carried tiny raindrops, some floated alone. When the bell rang for lunch, the hallway exploded into familiar chaos. Students hurried toward the cafeteria. Jimin hesitated. Crowded places still made him uncomfortable. Without saying anything, Jungkook quietly led him outside instead. Behind the school stood an enormous maple tree overlooking a gentle hill. Its branches spread like protective arms above a weathered wooden bench. "This is my favorite place. Because it's quiet," Jungkook nodded, "and because nobody notices it." They shared lunch beneath the tree. Jimin unpacked homemade rice balls his mother had prepared that morning. Jungkook revealed a simple sandwich wrapped neatly in cloth, neither asked for permission before sharing half. Conversation flowed naturally. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they simply watched clouds drifting overhead. "Lived here your whole life?" Jimin asked. Almost. I left once." "Vacation?" Jungkook's smile became smaller. No, he did not continue. Jimin sensed the invisible wall behind that single word. He respected it. Instead of asking more questions, he changed the subject. "My father loved rainy days." Jungkook looked at him. He said storms reminded people how small they really were. Silence settled gently between them. "He sounds like someone who noticed beautiful things." Jimin stared at the distant hills. He disappeared. The words escaped more quietly than expected. 3 years ago. Jungkook did not interrupt. He was a firefighter. I'm sorry, no one ever found him. Rain began falling again, not heavily, just enough for tiny droplets to dance across the grass. Jimin laughed bitterly. I kept thinking, if I had asked him not to go that day. You were a child. I know. Sometimes knowing isn't enough. Jungkook lowered his eyes. I understand. Jimin looked at him with surprise. You do? My grandmother used to tell me guilt is like carrying someone else's suitcase. What does that mean? You keep dragging something that was never yours. Simple words struck deeper than Jimin expected. For years he had carried invisible weight without realizing how heavy it had become. The afternoon classes passed peacefully. By the time school ended, another light shower covered the town. Instead of heading straight home, Jungkook pointed toward a narrow road disappearing into a grove of tall cedar trees. I want to show you something. Path twisted gently uphill. Water dripped from every branch. The air smelled of damp wood and wild mint growing beside the trail. Hidden among the trees stood a tiny wooden cabin. Its paint had faded long ago. Flower pots lined the porch despite containing nothing but fresh rainwater. My grandfather built this. No one lives here. Not anymore. Jungkook unlocked the old door. Inside, dust floated lazily through beams of afternoon light. Shelves filled with books covered one wall. An old piano rested quietly in the corner. Several framed photographs decorated the fireplace. Jimin wandered slowly around the room. Everything felt frozen in time. His attention stopped on a photograph showing a much younger Jungkook standing beside an elderly man. Both were laughing. The smile looked exactly the same. My grandfather taught me how to listen. Oh, just here. Jungkook walked toward the dusty piano. He pressed one key. Its gentle note echoed through the empty cabin. When it rains, every sound changes. Another note. Trees sound different. Another. The wind becomes softer, and lonely people become easier to recognize. Jimin swallowed quietly. Stop pretending. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the roof. The cabin filled with peaceful echoes. Jimin sat beside the window watching droplets race each other down the glass. He had spent years convincing himself that loneliness made people stronger. Now he wondered if it had only made him quieter. As evening approached, they cleaned a little dust from the old table before leaving. Neither spoke during the walk back. The silence no longer felt awkward. It felt comfortable, like two people discovering they did not always need words. When they reached the familiar crossroads, they paused. You know, Jimin said softly. Yesterday I thought the rain ruined my day. Jungkook smiled. Now, Jimin looked toward the cloudy sky where faint sunlight finally began breaking through. Now I think it brought me exactly where I needed to be. Jungkook laughed, the warm, genuine laugh that seemed capable of chasing away even the darkest clouds. For the first time in years, Jimin felt that perhaps life was not only about surviving painful memories, perhaps it was also about allowing unexpected moments and unexpected people to gently rewrite them. The evening breeze carried the fading scent of rain through the quiet streets as both boys walked toward their separate homes, unaware that every shared conversation, every quiet smile, and every rainy afternoon was slowly weaving a friendship that would become one of the most unforgettable chapters of their lives.
The first rays of dawn filtered through the maple leaves outside Jimin's bedroom, scattering patches of golden light across the wooden floor. The town felt unusually peaceful, as if it were still waking from the long conversation it had shared with the rain. A cool breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the distant aroma of freshly baked bread from the neighborhood bakery. Jimin tied his shoelaces with a quiet sense of anticipation. He no longer counted the days since he had moved to town. Instead, he found himself looking forward to the moments he would spend with Jungkook. When he arrived at school, he noticed something unusual. The courtyard was crowded with students gathered around a large bulletin board. Excited voices overlapped, filling the morning air with speculation. Jungkook appeared beside him, balancing 2 warm buns wrapped in paper. I saved one for you. Jimin accepted it with a grateful smile. What's everyone looking at? The annual Summer Memory Festival. Jimin read the colorful poster. Every class would prepare a project representing the meaning of friendship, family, and hope. The projects would be displayed in the town square during the festival, where everyone could visit and vote for their favorite. Winning class gets a trip to the lake, Jungkook explained. You sound more interested in the lake than the competition. Never liked competitions. Then why are you smiling? Because making something together is usually more fun than winning. Those words lingered in Jimin's mind as they entered the classroom. Their teacher soon announced that students would work in pairs. Almost instantly, everyone began choosing partners. Before Jimin had the chance to wonder whether anyone would ask him, Jungkook casually placed his notebook on the empty desk beside him. I already chose mine, Jimin laughed. You didn't even ask. I didn't think I needed to. Their classmates smiled knowingly. Even those who barely knew Jimin had noticed how naturally the two boys had become inseparable over the past few days. The assignment was simple in theory, but surprisingly difficult in practice. Create something that represents a memory worth protecting. Many students immediately suggested paintings, photographs, or handmade models. Jimin remained silent. He couldn't think of a memory he wanted to display. Most of the memories he carried were wrapped in loss. After school, Jungkook led him back to the old abandoned train station. Sunlight streamed through the cracked windows, illuminating tiny particles of dust that floated lazily through the quiet building. "Been thinking," Jungkook said. "What if we don't create a memory?" Jimin looked confused. "What do you mean? What if we create a place where memories can be kept?" They spent the afternoon exploring the forgotten station. Behind a pile of old wooden crates, they discovered an abandoned bookshelf leaning against the wall. Its surface was scratched and faded, but it was still sturdy. Jungkook gently brushed away years of dust. This could work. For what? A memory shelf. Together, they carried it into the brightest corner of the station. They repaired loose boards, cleaned every surface, and carefully sanded the rough edges until the old wood felt smooth beneath their fingertips. Cloud, who had happily followed them from Jungkook's house, chased drifting leaves outside while occasionally running inside to inspect their progress before racing away again. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the empty shelf slowly transformed. Jimin carved tiny stars along its sides with a pocket carving tool that Jungkook's grandfather had once owned. Jungkook painted small blue raindrops across the top. Neither decoration was perfect. That somehow made them even more beautiful. "What should we put on it?" Jimin asked. "Anything people don't want to forget." The following day, they carried the shelf to school with the help of several classmates. Curiosity spread quickly. One by one, students began placing small objects on the shelves: a faded movie ticket, a friendship bracelet, a tiny seashell collected during a family vacation, a pressed flower, a handwritten letter. Each object carried a story. Each story carried a feeling. Soon, the shelf no longer belonged to Jimin and Jungkook alone. It belonged to everyone. During lunch, one of their classmates, Minseo, hesitated before approaching. She quietly placed an old key on the middle shelf. "My grandmother gave me this before she passed away," she whispered. "I don't even know what it unlocks anymore." Jungkook smiled gently. "Maybe it unlocks the memory itself." Minseo smiled through watery eyes before returning to her seat. Jimin watched the exchange in silence. Only a week ago, he had believed sadness was something people should hide. Now he realized that shared memories often became lighter when someone else chose to carry them with you. That afternoon, their teacher visited the classroom to check everyone's progress. She stopped in front of the shelf for a long time. Without saying a word, she removed a fountain pen from her pocket and placed it beside the other keepsakes. "It was my father's," she said softly. "He taught me how to write my first story." No one spoke. The classroom became wonderfully quiet, not awkward, respectful. As school ended, golden sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating every object resting on the shelf. Each one looked ordinary, yet together they created something extraordinary. Walking home beside Jungkook, Jimin finally understood why his friend loved forgotten places. An abandoned train station, an old bookshelf, a lonely puppy. None of them had lost their value. They had simply been waiting for someone willing to notice them again. Jimin smiled as the evening breeze rustled through the trees. Perhaps people were not so different. Sometimes all a lonely heart needed was someone who saw it, not for what it had lost, but for everything it could still become. As they disappeared into the quiet streets of the little town, the setting sun painted the clouds with soft shades of amber and rose. And for the first time in a very long while, Jimin felt that his future was no longer something to fear. It was something he was beginning to look forward to. The festival arrived beneath a sky as clear as polished glass. After days of gentle rain, the sun finally shone without hesitation, bathing the little town in warm golden light. Colorful banners stretched across the streets, fluttering lazily in the summer breeze. Laughter echoed between the old buildings, and the scent of grilled food, fresh flowers, and sweet pastries drifted through every corner of the square. Jimin had never seen the town so alive. Children chased bubbles through the streets, while musicians filled the air with cheerful melodies. Elderly couples walked hand in hand, stopping to admire handmade crafts displayed beneath rows of white tents. Their class carefully carried the memory shelf into the center of the exhibition. The wood gleamed softly beneath the sunlight. Every carved star, every painted raindrop, and every small object resting on its shelves seemed to tell a different story. People stopped almost immediately. Instead of simply looking, they read the handwritten notes placed beside each keepsake. Some smiled, some laughed quietly, others wiped tears from their eyes. An elderly man stood in front of the shelf longer than anyone else. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and carefully placed an old train ticket beside the other memories. "I was only 16, he murmured with a gentle smile. "This ticket was from the day I first met my wife." He looked at Jimin and Jungkook. "Thank you for reminding me." Boys exchanged quiet smiles. Neither of them had expected strangers to become part of their project. As the afternoon continued, the shelf slowly filled with dozens of new memories: a tiny marble, a faded ribbon, a dried maple leaf, a worn-out photograph. Every object carried a life. Every life carried a story. Jimin realized that memories were not treasures because they were perfect. They were precious because they proved someone had lived, loved, and hoped. Cloud wandered happily around the festival wearing a small blue ribbon around his neck. Children laughed as the playful puppy chased butterflies between the flower beds before running back to Jungkook with his tiny tail wagging furiously. "Become popular," Jimin laughed, scratching behind Cloud's ears. "I think he likes the attention." "Do you?" Jungkook laughed. "Pretend I didn't hear that." As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, the mayor stepped onto the stage to announce the festival results. The square gradually fell silent. Teachers gathered beside their students. Parents stood proudly behind them. Jimin's hands instinctively tightened around the edge of his shirt. He had not realized he was nervous until that moment. Jungkook noticed. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "I'm already happy. Because of the project. Because I made it with you." Simple words eased the tension inside Jimin more than any announcement ever could. The mayor smiled warmly before speaking. "This year's projects reminded us that our town is more than streets and houses." He paused. "It is made of people." Applause rippled through the crowd. "When choosing the winner, we looked not only at creativity, but also at the way each project brought people together." He unfolded the final card. "The Summer Memory Festival Award goes to..." A brief silence settled over the square. The memory shelf. Cheers erupted from every direction. Jimin froze. For a heartbeat, he simply stared. Then the realization finally reached him: their class had won. Students rushed forward, laughing and celebrating. Several classmates hugged Jimin before he even had time to react. Someone lifted Jungkook into the air while Cloud barked excitedly, running circles around everyone's feet. The teacher wiped away happy tears. "I knew there was something special about this project." Jimin looked toward Jungkook. Instead of celebrating wildly, his friend quietly walked back to the memory shelf. He gently touched the old train ticket the elderly man had left behind. "What are you doing?" Jimin asked. Jungkook smiled. "I was thinking." "About what?" "We built a shelf." Everyone else filled it. Jimin looked at the countless keepsakes now resting there. He understood. Friendship was the same. One person could open the door, but many hearts made it feel like home. As evening settled over the town, colorful lanterns were lit above the square. Their soft glow reflected in every smiling face. Music filled the warm summer air as families gathered for the final celebration. Jimin and Jungkook slipped away from the crowd for a while, climbing the small hill overlooking the festival. From there, the entire town shimmered beneath hundreds of tiny lights. "It looks beautiful," Jimin whispered. "It always does." "Then why did I never notice before?" Jungkook smiled gently. "Because sometimes happiness isn't something that suddenly appears." He looked toward the glowing streets below. "It's something we slowly learn to see." Jimin remained silent. He thought about the frightened boy who had arrived in town believing loneliness would protect him. That boy already felt very far away. Not because his painful memories had disappeared, but because they no longer defined every tomorrow. The evening breeze carried the faint sound of laughter up the hill. Cloud curled beside them, already asleep after an exciting day. The lanterns below continued glowing like countless little stars scattered across the earth. Jimin closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening to the peaceful rhythm of the town around him. When he opened them again, he smiled, not because life had become perfect, but because, somewhere between the first rain, an abandoned train station, a rescued puppy, and a quiet boy named Jungkook, he had discovered that even the loneliest heart could bloom again when someone chose to walk beside it. And beneath the warm summer sky, surrounded by memories that would remain long after the festival ended, two friends quietly watched the lights dance across their hometown. grateful that one unexpected rainy afternoon had changed both of their lives forever.
The days after the summer memory festival settled into a gentle rhythm, yet something had quietly changed. The town no longer looked like an unfamiliar place to Jimin. Every street held a memory now. Every corner reminded him of a shared laugh, a quiet conversation, or the sound of clouds' cheerful barking echoing through the afternoon. Summer was slowly giving way to early autumn. The mornings became cooler. Golden leaves began appearing among the green branches, drifting lazily onto sidewalks still carrying faint traces of the season's last rain. One Saturday morning, Jungkook arrived at Jimin's house carrying 2 bicycles. "I have a surprise." Jimin stepped outside, raising an eyebrow. "You borrowed bicycles. My father said we could use them." "What?" "You'll see." Cloud ran excitedly between them, barking as if he already knew the destination. The 3 of them followed a narrow country road leading away from town. The farther they rode, the quieter everything became. The sounds of busy streets faded until only the wind, rustling trees and birdsong remained. After nearly an hour they reached the top of a gentle hill. Beyond it stretched a breathtaking field of wildflowers swaying beneath the autumn breeze. The flowers danced in shades of yellow, white and soft purple, creating waves of colour beneath the endless blue sky. Jimin stood speechless. "Never seen this place." "Many people come here," Jungkook replied. "My grandfather brought me once when I was little." They laid their bicycles beneath a large oak tree and wandered through the flowers. Butterflies drifted lazily from blossom to blossom. Cloud chased them enthusiastically, never quite fast enough to catch one. Jimin laughed so hard that he had to stop walking. "You know," he said between breaths, "he never gives up." Jungkook watched the puppy with a smile. Maybe that's why he's always happy. Their afternoon passed peacefully. They skipped stones across a nearby stream, shared sandwiches beneath the oak tree and watched clouds drift across the wide autumn sky. As the sun climbed higher, Jungkook reached into his backpack. "I found something." He unfolded an old notebook with a faded blue cover. Its pages had yellowed with age. "My grandfather wrote in this." Jimin carefully opened the first page. The handwriting was neat and steady. Each page contained observations about ordinary days, the smell of rain before sunrise, the first flower blooming after winter, the sound of distant trains at night. None of the entries were dramatic, yet each one felt deeply meaningful. Near the final pages, Jimin stopped. One sentence had been underlined. "The greatest friendships are rarely loud. They grow quietly like trees, becoming strong before anyone notices how deeply their roots have reached." Jimin read the sentence twice, then a third time. "Sounds like us." Jungkook smiled. "I thought so too." They sat in comfortable silence beneath the oak tree, each turning the fragile pages with great care. Near the back of the notebook rested a folded envelope. It had never been opened. Jungkook looked surprised. Never seen this before. Paper felt delicate in his hands. After a brief hesitation, he carefully unfolded the letter. The ink had faded slightly, but the words remained clear. It was written by his grandfather, not to anyone in particular. Simply to whoever might someday read it. The letter spoke about kindness, patience, and the courage to remain gentle in a world that often rewarded hardness. It ended with a single sentence. "If you are lucky enough to find a friend who makes your ordinary days feel unforgettable, never take that miracle for granted." Boy spoke for several minutes. The breeze gently turned one corner of the page. Cloud rested his head on Jungkook's knee, as though sensing the quiet importance of the moment. Finally, Jimin looked toward his friend. "I think your grandfather was right." "Do I?" The sun slowly began sinking toward the horizon. Golden light spilled across the flower field, transforming every blossom into a tiny lantern glowing beneath the evening sky. They packed their things and began the ride home. Halfway down the hill, Jimin slowed his bicycle. "What is it?" Jungkook asked. Jimin glanced back at the field one last time. "When I first moved here, I thought I had lost everything." Jungkook waited quietly. "But maybe," he smiled. "I was simply making room for something I didn't know I needed." Jungkook's smile answered before his words did. The 2 friends continued riding side by side as the setting sun painted the road ahead in warm shades of amber and gold. Behind them, the field of wildflowers swayed gently in the evening breeze, keeping its quiet promise to bloom again with every changing season. And although neither of them realized it yet, the memories they were creating together were becoming the kind that would remain bright in their hearts long after the flowers had faded. The rains had returned, and childhood itself had become a distant chapter of their lives.